You are, sir. Get it recorded.
I did 4 school boards.
Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to this work session. This work session deals with AO 2011-4. And let's go around the table and get everybody to identify themselves for the record, please. Debbie?
Debbie Yossi under Assembly.
Harriet Drummond, Assembly.
Paul Holman, Assembly.
Mike Gutierrez, Assembly.
Patrick Flynn, Assembly.
Dick Drainey, Assembly.
Bernie Hall, Assembly.
Jennifer Johnston, Assembly.
And Ilbiger Jackson is here somewhere because I see her chair.
James Gray, Acting Fire Marshal.
Karen Walsh, Building Official and Deputy Director of Development Services.
Ross Knopfsinger, Manager, Engineering Services.
Shailen Ryan, AO Elevator Inspector.
Jerry Weaver, Director of Development Services, or Community Development.
Yeah.
One of those.
Thanks for being here. Appreciate it. We're on the record, so keep in mind anything you say will be recorded and can be used later against you. So who's doing the presentation?
Okay, I'll just give a quick overview and then
Okay.
turn over for detailed questions to Ross. What do you have? Does everyone have the information in front of them? The Assembly Memo, Exhibit A and Exhibit B? We have some extra copies.
Do you have that?
I don't have Exhibit A.
It's in the, Exhibit A is in your book.
Oh, okay.
I do have an extra here though.
Exhibit B is here.
Fill it out and I look at the house. I got my list.
Okay. So the Assembly Memorandum gives a background into well, what this is all about is, as you know, through the code cycles, approximately every 3 years, new building code provisions are incorporated into the existing code, and the way that it traditionally works is repealing the entire Title 23 and adopting all the new stuff. Ross is the expert on that process, so if you have questions about that, you can correct it to him in a minute. We have some background in the AM about some of the main provisions, changes. The building board also was heavily involved in this code revision. They typically are always heavily involved. You'll see Appendix A, all the different code committees that reviewed the different provisions as they came through and either adopted, for use as they are, or had a local amendment speaking to something differing from the international code. There's information about the state of Alaska, which also adopts the code. They defer to the municipality for work done within the municipality, and there's a brief description of where they are with things. They're actually a little behind us timing-wise on this one. They'll be adopting it later this year. And then Appendix A, I just explained all the different people had input to these revisions and local amendments. And then Exhibit B is the significant changes. Rather than go through every one of them here, I'll turn it over to Ross. Would you like him to, your preference, would you like him just to touch on each one, or do you want to just ask questions on the
Why don't we have you go through your presentation and we'll go to semi-merge for a question. I know I wrote 4 of them down. I can answer all 4 of these questions.
Okay.
We'll move on from there. Ross, if you want to go ahead.
Okay, brief overview. The ordinance before you is this, okay?
So do you have the Reader's Digest version?
Yeah, 230 some pages, whatever. What this does, it's the Anchorage Administrative Code plus all the local amendments to these national codes here, which are the building codes adopted by the municipality of Anchorage to regulate construction. This is a residential code, 1 and 2 family dwellings, commercial code, fire code, plumbing, mechanical, and fuel gas codes, energy code, and existing building code. So building safety plan review and inspectors, we enforce these codes.
And existing building code means code for existing buildings.
So basically, the building board, members of the building board chaired committees that reviewed each one of these codes for adoption within the municipality of Anchorage. That was Exhibit A. The committees were made up of architects, engineers, and contractors, basically experts in the particular fields, because this is such a technical, vast range of information. We, form the committees with the experts. They're the ones who created this document along with municipal staff, plan reviewers, and inspectors before you. Obviously, these codes come out every 3 years. They're updated every 3 years as technology evolves, as we find out new ways and better ways of doing things. And what we tried to do with Exhibit B here was summarize the most significant changes that are going to take place between the 2006 codes that we're currently under right now and the 2009 codes before you. Obviously, there's been thousands of changes, you know, and when we can't touch on them all, we just did the best we could to pick out the most significant ones. We only got an hour of time here. It's kind of up to you guys as to how deep you want me to mine at this point. If you want, I could go line by line right down through Exhibit B
We do
and
have
give
some
you an
questions.
overview.
You've already got some coming. So let's deal with the questions we've got, and then we'll see if we have time to start drilling it down. Jennifer?
And just, if I could say, the copies that you have of Exhibit B, we revised and put line numbers. The extra copies that we're passing out, we didn't have a chance to catch that up. So for the people who are getting the public copies that are referring to a line, you don't have the number. Okay.
Jennifer?
Because I haven't had enough time to read this, I can't ask you specific questions on this, but my broad-based questions are, with code changes, how many of them are retroactive?
Okay.
And
The only retroactive code that we have is the fire code. And the reason is because the fire code is the maintenance code for existing buildings. Okay? On your Exhibit B, we've only, we have 2 retroactive requirements listed here. One is a brand new requirement to the codes.
What page?
That is on page 2 of Exhibit B, under 2009 International Fire Code. I'm going to actually jump down and do the luminous egress path markings. That's a brand new requirement that came into the National Code. What that is it only applies to high-rise buildings, basically buildings 8 stories and higher usually. They have to have a occupied floor 75 feet or more above street level. So this building would just barely hit the threshold. And what it is they're requiring these luminous stickers or paint along the stair treads and the handrail, such that when you lose power, you'll still be able to pick your way down the stairs to get out of the building. And this is a result of the NIST study on the World Trade Center disaster. And it was debated on the national code level for many years before it finally made it into the code, as you can see. That is a retroactive requirement. That requirement falls under the jurisdiction of the fire department. So James Gray is going to be burdened with how to administer that requirement.
could you
Okay?
explain, sorry,
I'll get you on the list, Debbie. Terry.
actually I have 2 or 3 questions, but this sparked the change just above it.
Okay, the emergency operation of elevators? That too is a retroactive requirement in that it applies to existing buildings. The difference, that requirement has been in the code since 2000. It was in the 2000 fire code, the 2003, then the 2006. The issue with this one is that we haven't been applying it or enforcing it basically through these codes. And so the elevator code committee and the fire code committee have basically come up with, they realize we really need to start enforcing this thing because it's been in the codes. And so we need to come up with kind of a soft way to bring it in. So they came up with a 5-year and a 7-year phase-in time period allowance, depending on the height of the building.
And is this basically an emergency redundancy system?
Jalen could probably speak to best the actual workings of these systems. Jalen's an elevator inspector for the MOA.
There's a reference in the fire code to an elevator code called the A17.3. There's a half a page in that book that makes an elevator compliant with this fire code. And what's on that page is some analysis with regards to what's in the elevator. If there's an old stop button in an elevator, it has to alarm, not just stop. There's a certain level of fire service that the elevator has to have for emergency personnel to use the elevator and to ensure nobody's trapped in it, and then to use it if they want to fight fires or to evacuate the building. There are a couple other requirements with regard to emergency devices in the elevator. One has to do with communications from the elevator cab to a 24-hour source. if somebody's trapped in it. So there's a couple different things that the fire code wants as a part of elevator function to comply with that fire code, 607.1 in chapter 46. So what you do is you basically take a checklist and you can look at each elevator that might have to comply with this, and you'd say, oh, that elevator has it all and it's fine. You know, some older elevators may not comply with it, and there's a couple things they might need to be compliant with it. Some elevators might need every one of the bulleted items that's needed to comply with this code. So each one will be different.
I just got one.
Just one more, then I gotta move on to Debbie.
And you kind of did an overview of the process, but in the process, do you ever go through this? I mean, I know that we're brought the, I almost bet it's acronym, the United Uniform Building Code, and then you tweak it for local. Do you ever look back at what you have as a code and see what is relevant, what isn't irrelevant, or do you just depend on the UBC and then sort of go from there? I mean, I just wonder how much, and you know, we get all sorts of rumors. You know, one of the rumors I heard is that you have to have sprinklers in a walk-in freezer. You know, that kind of thing. And I don't know if it's true or not, but I just wonder, as your assessment, as you go through this, how do you approach it?
Yeah, we look at all the details, the various code committees do. In addition, we look at both the code itself, the new code, we look at the old code, and we look at our old amendments, and we see stuff. Is this still relevant? Do we still need this? Should we get rid of it now? And all these issues are debated. These are pretty big documents. We could obviously miss something, but we try not to.
Debbie?
There's two, I had read this Exhibit B last week, and I was trying to refresh my mind. There were two items on it that caught my eye. One is the residential care assisted living facilities, how that interacts with the sprinkling issue. And my understanding after reading this is we're talking small residential, which is under 5. I'm trying to remember code defining small residential care facility, but I think is it 3 to 5? Okay. So the way I read this is now if you have that, you don't have to be sprinkled, but if you have a new one, you do have to have sprinkler system.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Even if it's an existing home, the requirement still there. So there's going to be a significant hurdle for folks who want to start one of these new residential facilities, cost-wise. Is that correct? Well, I mean, yes, it's correct.
It's kind of a relative thing because, you know, let's say it costs them $5 a square foot to put a sprinkler in, and it's a 2,500 square foot house. Well, let's say that's going to cost $7,500 or $10,000 to sprinkle it. Well, these, a lot of times they're getting $3,000 plus per person per month they're caring for, or whatever.
I have to tell you, they're borderline, a lot of them are making it on the small one, so
but
it's
the
a
big
significant issue.
The big issue here is this applies to these facilities where people are incapable of self-preservation. They need assistance from staff to get out of the building. They're not going to get out of the building.
How are you going to define that?
How do we define that?
Yeah.
It's defined in the code, actually.
We have a whole section on evacuation capability, whether it's slow, intermediate, or fast. And we've also got a long history of fires and fatalities in facilities where folks are incapable of self-evacuation. They're some of the most vulnerable occupants.
Say you've got a family that they take care of 3 people. Are you going to individually assess those people's condition to determine if they need a sprinkler system or not?
What we do if it falls under the category where they have to be sprinkled and it has to be permitted, we would assess the evacuation capability of the building, and it's based on the least capable person. So we would time the evacuation.
Okay, I think I asked the question incorrectly. I'm sorry. So is it possible to take care of 3 people and not to have the requirement? Say they could show that they were capable of exiting? Is that possible?
Well, if you were only licensed for 3, you would fall into that. But
Yeah, you would. This is 3 to 5.
if you're saying, we're talking about our assisted living.
Yes.
Well, again, if you had 3 people and you fall into that category and one of them is not capable of exiting in the evacuation time, that's how we would base it. That's what we base it on.
But I'm trying to figure out when that hammer hits. In other words, if I've got 3 people on, can I take them someplace to show that they're all capable of exiting and get rid of this requirement? Or is it going to be automatic? Anytime you have 3 people, the requirement hits?
Well, ideally, this would hit up front, you know.
So yes, it is automatic, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, when they come in and say, we want to do an assisted living facility, and that would be a question we'd ask them at any time, do you plan on caring for people who are incapable of self-preservation? And most likely the answer is yes. That's why these people are in these homes. And so yes, this is intended to apply to all these facilities that care for people who can't self-rescue. And what happens generally is maybe when a person first goes into a home, they can get out. But through time, their condition will degenerate, and they can't.
The other question I had was on the forced air furnace in the garage. Basically, I can't understand what the requirement here is, because it talks about limiting the leakage, and then it says you can't limit the leakage.
Okay.
So what's the deal on the furnaces in the garage?
Okay, so the code requirement basically says...
It's on page
5.
5 at the bottom.
Thanks.
Okay. So the code requirement basically says that you can have a furnace in the garage as long as the furnace, the leakage of the furnace and the ductwork combined is less than 6% of the total amount of airflow the furnace is moving. AHFC has had this requirement in place since I think it's saying here, for several years anyway. And what they found is that furnaces you go buy off the shelf are so leaky, they don't meet this requirement. And they've tried to seal them up so that they would meet this requirement, and they can't quite get there. And so what they found is the only practical way to meet this requirement is to not to have the furnace in the garage, is to basically include the furnace within the living space of the dwelling unit by putting walls around the furnace that separate it from the garage.
That's a mega change for a lot of homes in Anchorage.
Mm-hmm.
So we're saying no more furnaces in garages?
Well, I mean, if you want to do HFC financing, this has been required for several years now. So for some builders, it will be a big change. For some, it won't.
Well, I've been shopping with kids for houses a fair amount the last 2 years. And man, I can't find a house without a furnace and a garage. Could I ask a couple of the builders in the room? I'm sorry?
Remember, this is forced air furnaces, not
This is
hot
not hot
boilers.
water boilers, this is forced air furnaces, and it's not retroactive. It doesn't apply to existing homes.
When you retrofit.
Want to drill down further, Debbie?
A little bit.
Okay,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
I do see some builders in the room.
We have 40 minutes.
Okay.
Chairman, we do
I
have
apologize. I'll wait then and talk to them
I'll
privately.
come back to you, Debbie.
We do have the chairman of the building board here, Paul Michelson. Who is
That's
a
who I was looking
local
at.
builder. Yeah.
Let me go through and I'll come back to you, Debbie. Harriet?
On the exit lighting, on page, luminous egress path markings on 2. If this building, you mentioned something about this building having to be retrofitted for that because, say, it's 80 feet high. Does that mean that all the stairwells and exit hallways have to be lighted from the top to the bottom?
Yeah, well, they're not really lit up. These are photoluminescent strips that glow when the lights go out.
Okay.
Yeah, it's both the exit stairways.
And if you have a 70-foot high building, you won't have to do that?
Correct.
Because the fire...
The
ladders
threshold's
reach.
75 feet.
Okay.
Anything else, Harriet?
No, not right now.
Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm curious, I'm looking on page 3, starting at line 6, about fire sprinkler systems, and we've already heard a few questions about that. Regarding single-family homes, duplexes, and townhouses. I know this was one requirement that the building industry really seriously, I think, didn't want. And I know it would be a big addition to the cost of building a home. But what I'm curious about is if we left this in, if we were to leave this in our code, if there is savings to the city in a reduced need for fire service. I mean, could we reduce the fire department budget if all our homes were sprinkled? James, I don't know if you can answer that or not, but you want to take a crack at it? No?
And to that question, if I could, Mr. Chair.
No, anybody know?
Well, such a significant portion of Anchorage is already built. This would only affect the homes that haven't been built yet. So it would really be
It
hard
would be
to.
a small impact.
Yeah.
Big
Oh, I
issue.
see.
Would it
It's
be
not
retroactive if we sold our homes to have to bring them up to sprinkler standards?
Let me clarify the sprinkler issue. The 2009 IRC is written. If we were to adopt it as written, it would require that every new home built have a fire sprinkler system in it.
What about older homes that you're putting on the market?
No, there's no retroactive requirement there.
But
The code committee removed that requirement from this code. There's a local amendment that deletes the requirement to have sprinklers in this package before you.
Anything else, Mike?
No, thank you, sir.
Okay. Mr. Berkshire?
Didn't see it in here, but I think I had a phone call or an email from somebody who was concerned about putting a sprinkler in the pit, an elevator pit. And I don't know, I'm trying to recall the discussion. Is that a requirement now, or is that a kind of a case-by-case basis, or what drives that?
It's not a new requirement. It was in the 06 code. It was in the 06 local amendments. And this is kind of one of these things that the fire sprinkler standard, NFPA 13, that all these buildings are sprinklered under, has required this sprinkler going back decades. We're really not sure when it first started and whatnot. But it's one of these issues that hadn't really been enforced for various reasons. And Jalen could probably explain that better than anybody. And so the fire department on the 2006 code committee felt that this was a significant enough issue that we really need to get clarified and be consistent on. So they stuck a specific local amendment in that requires that these existing elevator pits that aren't sprinkled be sprinkled. Now, it only applies to a building that requires a sprinkler system to begin with. It doesn't apply to buildings that don't have to be sprinklered. And the reason and logic behind it is, one, that this is the only sprinkler head in the whole shaft for the elevator. You don't want the sprinklers up above the elevator getting the electronics wet. Okay, and two, we found, and Jayla is an expert on this, is these pits generally fill up with trash and lint, and in hydraulic elevators, they'll have hydraulic fluid in them. So they end up with combustible material in them after a while. So that's a little background behind that.
So it's not really anything new, it's just it's an enforcement issue.
Yeah, and it's obvious it's new to that guy who has this 30-year-old building, and the elevator inspector goes out and says, oh, you need a sprinkler head in
I
your
think
pit.
that's probably what happened.
Yeah.
But,
Follow up, Jennifer?
well, in those situations, as a fire inspector, do you look at it in context of the building as far as what other exits there, what other, if the elevator's used, or do you're just flat out going to enforce this?
The way it's been is the person who catches it is the elevator inspector, because the fire inspector generally never has access to this elevator shaft. So the elevator inspector is the guy who finds it, and yes, when he doesn't see one, he writes it up, currently right now.
We're probably about 3/4 or more of the way through all elevators in Anchorage. When we're doing an inspection of an elevator and the building happens to be sprinklered, and there's not one in the pit, then
And you feel this
in
is
those
effective?
cases, when they occur, we're the notification vehicle, because the fire inspectors aren't in the pit.
Is that an exception or the rule? I mean, it's just like one or two, or are they basically none of them sprinkled, or is it?
Oh, no, many,
Most of them.
tons of them are sprinkled.
Most of them,
Yeah.
okay.
The ones that aren't, then we're the notification
Okay.
vehicle, because the fire inspectors aren't in there to enforce the fire code and local amendments, and we are.
Thanks.
Come back to Jennifer. Sorry. Mr. Honeman? you've been
Yeah,
very patient,
real
sir.
quick, like back to the sprinkler system for a minute, and I think I feel like I've got a pretty good grasp on that. Is there any data, or do you know, on this residential sprinkler requirement on the IFC, as you mentioned? Is that because we adopted the national codes as written in the book, is that an amendment and are there any other amendments, I guess, for not only the sprinkler system or any other of the codes in the books? I didn't see any, but are there any other amendments to opt out of some of the?
That's what these are, yeah.
Oh, okay.
All-
But I mean, are there any that significant like this one here? Life safety.
Significant opt-out amendment like that?
Life safety.
Life safety, I'd have to say that's a fairly unique one for that. I mean, generally our rule when we amend the codes is we only amend them for local climatic issues. You know, like falling snow and ice off buildings. The codes don't address that at all.
Right.
So we create a local amendment to address that. And so, yeah, does that answer your question?
I think so. And when I did a remodel on my place, I actually was tempted to do the sprinkler system, but it did, like most major projects, went a little over budget, and I wasn't able to squeeze it in there. But thank you.
Thank you.
There is, you might mention, is it a 2% tax incentive to,
I'm not aware of the incentives. I heard there was
Yeah.
some insurance benefits
Right.
and some other tax.
There's a tax incentive, and we didn't go through it in the course of this, but I happen to be in a condo association in Girdwood, and we're pursuing it. It's a 2% tax break if you have a sprinkler building, but you have to apply for it and have an inspection and so on
Thank you.
first.
Elby, you're very
Mr.
patient,
Chairman.
ma'am. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'll have your choice. So first I want to say thank you for the summary, because that's a really good document. Yeah. And my second question is, you have all those different books, and you have one that applies to existing building codes, okay? So what I'd like to know is what changes apply to new construction, and what changes apply to existing construction?
Well, we tried to spell that out as best we could in here. I guess I couldn't really answer that specifically. I think most of the things we talk about in here, the vast majority of stuff in here applies to new construction. The only thing in here that really applies to existing are those two retroactive things in the fire code.
Okay.
Everything else pretty much applies to new work. It could apply to new work being done on an existing building, but it wouldn't be like a retroactive thing, like you got to go fix this problem that has nothing to do with the new work you're doing.
Right. Okay, so in terms of the existing building code pamphlet or manual, there's only two changes to it.
Retroactive changes, only two significant ones we could find.
Right.
We also have this existing building
Well, that's
code.
what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Existing, yeah.
This isn't, so this really isn't so much a retroactive code. This is basically acknowledging that the code changes every 3 years.
Okay.
And so, you know, you build a building 10 years ago and now all of a sudden it's out of code. So basically this thing is kind of like a watered down version of the building code.
So it's like a reference manual.
This only kicks in when you renovate an existing building, but it basically does not hold the renovation to the standard of the building code. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We'll go back to other people with further questions. Got a couple that I want you to answer for me. First, how are the inspectors trained in the new code?
How are the inspectors
How are the
trained?
inspectors trained in the new code?
We have update classes where we generally bring in ICC certified trainers who give us updates on the IRC, the IBC, the IFC, the whole shooting match. In addition to that, we have consistency meetings where we meet weekly for an hour and we go over this, you know, coordination issues and the new changes and whatnot.
Okay. Now, the inspectors have access to the code in the field. I mean, can they attach the code via laptop, BlackBerry, iPhone, whatever?
Currently, what we've been doing all these years is the inspectors have two code books, one for the office and one for the field, which is kind of a big, bulky, expensive thing. But now that we're automating our inspection process, they're now going to, and hopefully within a month or two, they're going to have laptops in the field. So we're going to get them electronic versions.
And Fire has that now.
I just want to make sure we have that, so the inspector will have the assets he needs when he's in the field doing the inspections on it.
Exactly.
Other than would be, what's the estimated cumulative cost to the private sector from these new changes? What's the cost going to be to the private sector?
Oh, good. We tried to summarize individually of the significant changes where costs would kick in. You know, just to take this whole thing and the thousands of changes and put a number on the cost, I couldn't do that.
Okay, so we don't know what the cost would be to the private sector?
No, we don't have like a hard number that this will be the cost to the private sector.
Some things will be cheaper.
Well, how is it going to impact the average homeowner buying a house? What's this going to add to the cost of the average $300,000 house in Anchorage?
Well, adoption of the 2009 International Energy Conservation Code is going to be a change for the guys building these single-family homes. Because historically, even though right now we're under the 2006 Energy Code, for single-family home construction, they're kind of under a watered-down version. All they have to do is apply or comply with this little prescriptive table that says I need R19 in my walls, and I need R38 in my attic. There's no requirements for sealing your vapor barrier or air sealing the house. A lot of this detail stuff. So with the adoption of the 2009 code, that little prescriptive table goes away, and now they're going to have to comply with the energy code, full on Chapter 4.
So they're going to raise the price by 30,000 per home, or
No,
what's the number we can
My
deal
guess would be probably be a couple $1,000 per home.
Throw a ventilation system in though, Ross, sorry to interrupt, but you got a $6,500 upgrade there you're talking about, so.
Well, that's not
misleading.
Yeah, excuse me.
Yeah.
It's not mandated that you put in a heat recovery ventilation system, which would be $6,500 per home. That's the best way to do it. That's the preferred way to do it. But in order to meet the code as written, as proposed in front of you, they could meet the whole house ventilation requirement of the code by putting in a $150 continuous duty exhaust fan in their crawl space, and basically suck air from the house into the crawl space and exhaust it continuously. They could also do this via the exhaust fans in their bathroom. So we're talking maybe a couple $100 increase to meet the ventilation issue.
Because I'm wondering, because the Matsu, do they have the 2009 change in the Matsu homes that are being constructed, or are they in the 2006? Or where are they at? Because I can see a house built in Matsu versus one in Anchorage, and there's a real cost difference. And a lot of times they say that's because of the cost of the land. But I want to know if it's also the cost and what we're requiring.
You know, houses built to if they're going for AHFC financing in the Matsu, energy-wise, that house is equivalent to or better than what's being built in Anchorage right now. Okay, if they're not going for AHFC financing, I don't think they have to abide by any standard that I'm aware of. So it wouldn't be an apples to apples comparison at that point.
Debbie?
Well, I've got a bunch of little ones that I'll probably be emailing in, but has there been an analysis about the impact of private well of a home, of a sprinkler system for a home? Do we know?
I missed the question.
What,
Well,
a sprinkler system on a home that's on-site? How does it
On-site well.
work? What's the impact? You know? Do we know?
I think that's problematic because you need storage for the fire suppression in addition to the well.
Well, it causes me a lot of concern, and I think it will the hillside too, particularly now if we're requiring that for residential care facilities. That basically, potentially at least, could limit them.
It could limit to where you could have them at.
Right, so you can't have a home care system in,
House
outside.
service, well, huh?
Yeah, and that's pretty serious, so I'd like to know that.
could you answer that?
Let Paulson do that.
Yeah, yes, ma'am. Through the chair, I'm associated with the National Association of Home Builders, also been on the ICC's boards for the review of the IRC, and there's been many studies, and that there's probably all 50 states have tried to amend out the sprinkler system in the code book for the same reasons you're asking. The added cost for wells varies. We did 3 of them 2 years ago, and the cost were $27,000 to $38,000. The reasons being we needed storage tanks, as Ross said, and then you have to have backflow preventer valves. When you have a backflow preventer valve, then that has to be inspected once a year. It's a mandated inspection by a certified, you might know that, certified mechanical compliant individual. And the other situation that we in the National Association of Home Builders have always argued, when you have a system on a well, and you have, most of the time it's generated through power, when you have a fire, especially electrical fire, it shuts down the power, which ultimately shuts down the sprinkler system.
Right.
The deaths in houses that are newer, from like say 10, 12 years old and newer, have dropped almost 97%. Most of the deaths that you're seeing by fires is older residents, and the code that has been addressed here only applies to new construction, as Ross has detailed, so it does nothing for the trailers and the older structures that still are the fire traps.
Okay, thanks.
Does that help you?
Yeah, a lot.
Go ahead,
It
Debbie.
reinforces my opposition to doing anything like this. But I want to tag on to Elvie's question a minute. So basically, if I'm selling a home, there's typically a requirement, a home inspector comes, checks it out to make sure. So the furnace, that furnace leakage won't be impacted there. The only two things that would be impacted, I'm seeing some, okay. What do I have to do to bring it up so I can sell my house? Is it just the two fire code items here, or is there something else?
Nothing here you have to bring up.
Well,
That whole industry of home inspection is this wild card, unregulated Wild West industry where that home inspector could go in and write down whatever he wanted you to bring up to code and say, well, it doesn't meet current code, you have to do it. But there's nowhere in these codes that say you have to bring this stuff up.
Well,
Okay?
I guess I'm confused because the lenders I've dealt with said that there are some fire code standards that have to be met before they'll lend on property.
The only, James, correct me if I'm wrong, the only retroactive requirement I'm aware of is emergency escape and rescue openings in bedroom windows. There is a certain minimum requirement for egress windows, emergency escape and rescue openings.
Okay, I have
Other than
direct
that,
contradiction personally with that.
well, we get called, I mean, my plan reviewers are bombarded with these calls all the time where people are calling in and saying, yeah, I had this home inspection done, and they say I need to redo my stairs or whatever.
Well,
It's
this
like,
is about
no-
ductwork and furnaces and
Yeah.
garages
What we need to
specifically.
differentiate, though, there's no kick-in for Ross to review it when it's sold, for me to review it when it's sold, for us to inspect it. There's no mechanism in place for that to happen. That's not in code. So if you go to sell your home, your purchaser's bank requires an inspection. They have their own private inspector. It's got nothing to do with us.
They don't base it on city code?
Well, I'm told they do, but I've seen a wide range of inspections. Like Ross said, it's not regulated by the state. It's not, there's no standard, there's no national organization that regulates it.
And maybe the buyer won't buy it.
Well, no, I know it's the lender's requirement, but the lenders are basing their rationale on city building code. Verbally, they told me that.
Well,
So I'm confused.
Well, the question is, what version of the code? Is it the 1970 code the house was built under, or is it the 2009 code, you know?
I've seen,
They're different.
I'll get a call from a homeowner seller, and they'll say, the inspector told me I have to do such and such. And I'll say, well, that's not in the code. And 5 minutes later, I'll get a call from the inspector. I say, what do you mean it's not in the code? And they say, well, we're under the 2006 International Fire Code now, and this is the requirement, and then there's a policy and interpretation on that. So it's an unregulated industry, but it is not, that piece of it, the sale is not regulated by the municipality.
Let me give you an example.
Firm answer, Debbie, huh?
Well, yeah, it's just absolutely against what I just experienced 6 months ago, so I don't know what to say.
I've got a couple other questions myself. Mr. Flynn, sir, and Mr. Stark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think what I heard, clarify if I'm wrong here, that lenders may or may not base their lending decisions based on any iteration of the code, whether it's one we adopted or whether it's one that looks on a national level, correct?
I mean, yeah, the banks can require whatever. You know, they could pick something out of the brand new code and say, we want you to comply with this.
Theoretically, as you say, they want to see sprinklers and all new construction.
They could, yes.
Going back to elevators, does this apply to freight elevators as well? I mean, if people aren't using them, they're used for moving furniture up and down in a store or something like that. Does it still have to comply with these emergency operations requirements?
If it's of a certain rise,
More than 25 feet?
yeah, then you analyze it to see if it needs to comply with this. So. And honestly, there are probably very few freight elevators in Anchorage that ultimately will end up needing to comply with this. There are some, but probably not very many.
Is it commercial buildings only, or if you have?
Commercial only, yeah. All the private residence conveyances and elevators don't fall underneath this retroactive requirement.
Mr. Starr, sir.
Well, it relates to the choices on your local amendments on some of the upgrades, in particular like structural, and you're taking it from a 5% number to a 10% number. I had the page and then I flipped over on some of that. Are we trying to address over and above seismic levels outside of our region, or my understanding is that if you pick a seismic code as you're building under, it appears that you're modifying it to a stronger, more structurally sound building.
Actually, what they've done, they've gone the other way. They've taken the code requirement at 5%, you need to be within 5%. They've given them a bigger allowance and say, it just needs to be within 10%. So it's reduced the structural requirement.
Well, 2365-302, for example, you're saying existing structural elements carrying gravity load, replace 5% in the first sentence to 10% in the first sentence. Isn't that your shear wall structures you require an additional coverage of shear wall?
It gives them a bigger cushion. You can exceed the allowable load or whatever by 10%, not 5%.
I thought
Before you have to address
You
it.
have to have a larger wall that's a shear wall, though. Is that not what's happening?
No, it's the exact opposite.
Okay. Well, I'll study it. I'm also challenged by the immediate acceptance of the item. As we would vote on it, it would become immediately acceptable. Why would you want to do that?
I'm not following what's...
On the codes. When the codes
Yeah.
are-
Oh, immediately effective? Well, we want it as soon as possible because what happens is the design community moves on without us. You know, if the municipality decides not to adopt the 09 codes, pretty soon we're going to start getting all these alternate methods requests to use them. And so now we're operating under two codes. We got some buildings going up under the 09s and some going up under the 06, and it's a big mess. So past experience has shown that they'll just leave us behind. We're getting called constantly, when are you going to adopt these, when are you going to adopt these? And it's generally to their benefit to move on to the next generation of code.
The architects perhaps, but not the owners. It's expensive. This is a pricey deal. We're seeing a lot of changes, not only in the residential, but the commercial. And I'm more a timing issue, folks, than I am anything. Are we ready to really stick it to them in some of these situations? We're talking automatic notifications. You're reducing occupancy levels from 100 to 50. I see those things going on in here.
Well, I don't know what you're talking about there.
I'll go offline like I will with Debbie, but I'm really reserved that we're going to pull the trigger and just tell industry tomorrow we're doing this.
Well, the only retroactive requirement that I'm aware of to hit existing buildings is this luminous egress path markings. That's new to the 09 codes. This whole elevator issue that we've been talking about, that's been there.
Well, but the summary was easily, you talk about it, but Jennifer's got a constituent that's doing that, and your elevator recall system for that, it's not, on these older modules, it's not a simple fix. You don't just get it done. You're talking a major deal, and I want the community to know that we're consciously going into this and not just, oh, I didn't know that was a ramification of the discussion, and then he placards his elevator out of service, and he can't, I'm very cautious here, folks. There's a lot in here.
Yeah, that's why the committees, IFC Code Review Committee and the Elevator Code Review
Well, I'll call
Committee.
some of these folks. That was news to me that you actually had these work teams going on.
Yeah, that's why the 5 and 7 years was put in there, because it's a huge pill to swallow.
I think it'd be helpful to have the information. We're about 2/3 of the way through all the elevators and being in compliance.
Oh, that's just the sprinkler part.
The
But
sprinkler
the
part,
IFC,
the
yeah,
emergency.
this retroactive piece here.
But emergency recall requires the dedicated phone line. You guys have to have the emergency recall to bring that down to first level. Why on a two-story structure are you guys moving that? That seems to be where you've gone for local amendment on that as well.
Well, it's tied into the fire alarm panel, but primarily we don't want you to be in an elevator and have the doors open if the fire is out on that floor. It's pretty basic. So, but they put in the time frame to allow folks to be able to accommodate that, because you're right, it does. If a building has an old alarm panel, they won't be able to tie an elevator into an old alarm panel. It takes a set of circuitry to be able to talk to it and figure that out. Typically, the elevator recalls to the first floor, but if that's where the fire is, we don't want that to happen. So there's safeguards to prevent against that, too.
I'm just challenged with, in a 2 or even a 3-story building, I think they're going to know where the fire is and they're going to try to get out. But
Well, it doesn't apply to a 2-story building because you have to have more than 25 feet of rise. So generally, that's even more than a 3-story building.
Well, the way I read this, though, and I'm studying it as you're explaining it, because I only see the blurb of the code here. I've got to go back to the book and show the rest of it. The occupancy level on the second floor, you reduce it from 150, do you? I mean, you take it down to...
In what sense? I mean,
the elevator recall requirement.
There's no occupant threshold on that.
No,
It's just the rise of the elevator.
Yeah, it's just based on rise.
And just the last thing, our ability to do plan reviews, are we there? I mean, and I don't particularly want to use some of the local industry experience that I'm doing, but structural comes to mind. Our ability in-house now, Mr. Weaver, maybe, are we able to handle structural review?
We are. We're doing exceptionally well. We're up 15 million more than last year this time of the year.
Timing and expense and ability to do alternate means and methods is what I'm after.
I can let Sharon speak to it. She deals with it daily, but we are meeting the thresholds and permits going out timely, the review is timely.
Well,
We are looking at additional staffing here in the near future.
But currently, right now, we have two very productive, very experienced structural plan reviewers reviewing every commercial structure being built in Anchorage that each one of them has probably got more than 5,000 reviews under their belt. We've had third-party contracts in place all along now to send projects out, and we haven't sent a project out in at least 2 years, no matter how structurally complex it's been.
Okay, I get it. I just saw a statement in here that we were stepping into new ground, and there was some reference that the first couple are going to be challenging, not only for that, but to me that means not only challenging, but expensive.
That first IBC 1614 on your very first page, that's a change in the IBC, a structural change for high-rise buildings. It's not just for high-rise buildings, it's for really big high-rise buildings that would have to have an occupant load of over 5,000 before it would even be triggered.
Okay.
Probably wouldn't even see a building built like that in Anchorage, in the near future. If we do, it'd be a great thing.
Anything else, Bill?
No, that's all.
Okay. Paul?
Yeah,
Then Jennifer.
refresh my memory so I can help when people make those calls. At what level, because I remember when I did my major remodel, there's different types of remodels where a lot of this code existing versus the new, whatever's adopted, kicks in. And I want to say it was a number, like level 3 or something like that. At what level does your remodeling on your minor project become something that you have to start watching the 2000 or the most recently adopted code?
Well, this existing building code does have like level 1, 2, and 3 renovations and repairs and whatnot. It's got kind of like different options for a designer to use to bring his remodel, to show code compliance with his remodel. So, it's kind of a wide open question. Some type of remodel work like carpet and paint don't even require permits, so we'll never see them. And that would be kind of your level 1 remodel. Level 2 remodels are where you start reconfiguring your space, and that's about generally where you're submitting for permits at that point. And designers start designing in compliance with the existing building code.
And is there a trigger when it starts getting into what's the most recent adopted code?
Well, there's certain very specific...
Like as if you were building new under the...
Yeah, there's certain specific issues that kind of say, well, if you're renovating this much of the floor or whatever, and the building's required to have a sprinkler system by code, but doesn't have a sprinkler system, if you renovate a certain portion of this building, at this point, it's going to trigger the requirement to put a sprinkler system in.
What about when you add like a whole new wing?
Right.
Or a separate piece of food?
Yeah, well, that would be in addition to a building, and the way additions work is the addition itself has to be built in compliance with the recent 2009 building code, but that does not trigger the rest of the building really having anything to be done. If this new addition is so big that it triggers the building going over its allowable area for the code, for the type of construction it is, and say the building doesn't have a sprinkler system, it may trigger having to put a sprinkler system into the whole building because it's too big now.
Thanks for the assist.
Jennifer, and then to the industry.
Actually, I'd like to go to the industry.
Okay. Talk to us.
Mr. Chairman, Assembly members, my name is Paul Michelson. I'm currently the current sitting chair of the building board for the Muni, and I sit on several boards throughout the community. And I've been involved with the codes review for long before Ross got there, long before James got there, probably since about 1980. I've sat on every one of them, chaired the last 4. I think we do a fairly extensive job reviewing the codes. We do the best we can. It's a compromise between the industry and between the municipality on what's acceptable, what's not. There's national efforts being made right now to turn the codes from an every 3-year cycle to a 6-year cycle. It's going to be a very heavy push. The fire sprinkler issue in the IRC is a very contentious issue nationwide. It was basically implemented through ICC's board meeting in Buffalo, New York 18 months ago. The Fire Coalition brought over 1,800 people to that vote for one vote. At 9:40 at night, there was 350 people in the room. At 9:50 at night, there was 2,240. At 10:05 at night, there was 140. So they came in for one vote, and the vote was sprinkler system in residential houses. There's a lot of statistics that go back and forth. that's been said, and that's all been heard of. Right now, there's a HB 130, which Mayor Sullivan backs in the legislature right now, that is going to, if a jurisdiction wants to enforce or mandate fire sprinklers in residential houses, they'll have to post a notice, have a meeting within 30 days, and then they have to have 2 additional meetings within 90, no more than 180 days from that time. And what the hopes of doing is to get the public aware of what's going on. As far as all the other codes, I'm heavily involved. I keep talking to Senator Starr here. I know most of the people on the other committees. We all chat. I think everybody's done a very exemplary effort to try to clean up the codes, amend them out as they are. And as the chairman of the building board, I would request that you accept as proposed. I wear 2 hats here, kind of. I'm on the building board. I'm also in the building industry. But we've all talked about it, and I think we can live with. There's some argument about the IECC, which is the International Energy Conservation Code. Right now, National Association of Home Builders is studying whether to sue DOE, Department of Energy, because Department of Energy has thrown out numbers about savings in energy, but there's no backing to it. There's no substantial proof that anything that they input into the IEC is really going to save 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%. So if that happens between DOE and EPA, there may be some lawsuits coming out down the road, and that will clean up some of it. Right now there's been a court order that DOE has to hand over to NEHB their significant data proving where they got the literature, where they got the numbers on the energy. The International Energy Conservation Code is probably the biggest hit the industry is going to take. I heard talk about how much. I'm thinking we're in the industry, we're thinking somewhere between 12 and 20%. So you said a $300,000 house is, it's going to be $3,000 to $10,000 probably. There are kickbacks, there's rebate issues. The legislature right now is contemplating putting another $75 million into the budget to help offset some of those costs. So if someone does an energy efficient home through AHFC, they can get rebates. But what a lot of people don't know is there's very few houses in Anchorage that are actually built under the AHFC requirements. Most of the AHFC requirements are the bush and the outer lying areas. The negative to that is the banks, they don't ever want a house that isn't built to AHFC, so the bank regulators are the ones that force the builders to build to the AHFC regulation. So then in the event that the houses are resold, that they can fall under the AHFC guidelines, and then they have the PUR 101 signatures, so that helps there. But like I said, as the chairman for the municipality, I seek that you approve these as we've all amended. They're documents and work in order. As we're, if it's July and August and we see that we've made a mistake, the industry goes to the city, and they've been very receptive to that, and they usually go along with us, and we correct any wrongdoings that possibly slip through.
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to go to Debbie.
Can I say one other thing,
Go ahead, sir.
Chair? There is, Jerry, can I bring this up about the leads issue?
Oh, sure.
The leads issue right now is a very controversial issue in the IB. It's not actually in the IBC, actually, it's just a separate. The building board met in December of last year. I think it was December, wasn't it? End of December.
December 14th.
We're supposed to meet February 17th to kind of clear up the leads, try to clear up the leads issue. The building board felt that we need more community involvement in trying to work out some of the, we're going to try to get BOMA involved and a few other organizations. There's a little glitch, and maybe Mr. Michaelis can help us. There's a little glitch with board appointments right now, as you are all aware of. So some of them expired, so we really can't have a board meeting because the ones that have expired really aren't board members anymore.
That'll be taken care of Tuesday night.
Yeah, so if that all happens, then we're going to try to have a meeting very rapidly with Ms. Walsh and Mr. Weaver's permission and help and organize it, and then we're going to try to gather the information from the community. I think the leads issue is probably not going to be solved till probably June of this year. The building board, I think, did hand the municipality a working document that they could work with until June of this year. Is that correct, Ross? I mean, I think we could work with it.
Well, we corrected probably the biggest problems with it. They have been corrected in the document before you, but it's still far from a perfect
No, the
document.
administration's
that's for
asked me to
certain.
open the public hearing on Tuesday, take testimony, and move to continue till the next meeting.
On this?
On this, they don't want us to take action this Tuesday on this, they want us to open the public hearing and continue it to the next meeting. Because they want to do some more work on the administration side of the house. So, that will happen this Tuesday. I'll open the public hearing, take some testimony, and then when we're done with testimony, we'll have a motion to continue, move it to the next meeting after that, the request of the administration.
If I, sir, if I could just, I don't know that the administration said that.
Well, I talked to the administration, they did. Other people in the administration, Mr. Michaelis, your boss.
Okay, well, we were unaware of that.
Well,
Mr. Chair, before we have
I'm not.
3 more minutes if possible on the leads, we have made an interim fix that's in the code before you. It's taken out the reimbursement portion. The original ordinance was poorly written, difficult to implement. We've cleaned up the language in the lead section and we've removed the reimbursement portion because we believe that that's not an appropriate function.
well, it's 12 o'clock, we're done with this work session. Debbie, any quick little thing out of you?
No, I'm going to be working on 1 minute.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. This work session's done, we'll begin the next one shortly. There's lunch back here, so please get something to eat. Then we got a work session with the ABC Board and the Assembly.